Alright, stop scrolling. This is the one. Go to sleep. The complete Roman Empire saga. 400 years, all in one place. I've spent over 2 years of my life crafting this series, all by myself. Over 20 hours of content, bringing you the ultimate chronicle of Rome. From the golden age of Augustus to the peak under Trajan, through the chaos of the 3rd century crisis. Well-seed coalition-s reforms, Constantinople's new capital, and the final split after Theodosius. This was a massive undertaking. If you appreciate the effort, a like and subscribe means the world. No time. Hit save for later, so you don't lose it. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Roman MP. In 1453, the last emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, and also the last emperor of Roman civilization, Constantinople, amidst the smoke of gunpowder in Constantinople, disappeared into the dust with the empire behind him. In 1460, the Ottoman army invaded the Morea, crushing the local resistance with the force of a whirlwind. The despot of Morea, Thomas, fled with his family to the island of Corfu. Among them was the future blood link of the Third Rome, the then 11-year-old little princess, then named Zoe. We often mention this last little princess of the Eastern Roman Empire, but most people's impression of her may be limited to this label. In this video, we will briefly review the life of this legendary last princess, Sophia Palaeologine. In 1449, Zoe was born in the Morea. Her father, Thomas, was the best brother of the last emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople. Her mother was Catherine Zaccaria, who was married to Thomas according to a peace treaty, after her father defeated the local rulers of the Morea. The Zaccaria family. Zoe had 3 siblings: Helena, who later married the despot of Serbia, Andreas, and Manuel. In her early years, Zoe lived a wandering life in the humiliation and chaos of a lost country. After her father Thomas went to Rome to ask for help from the Pope, Zoe and her brothers lived in the small seaport of Corfu. In 1462, their mother Catherine died there. In 1465, Thomas, on his deathbed, had his children brought from Corfu to the city of Rome. He also passed away shortly after. The orphan children were adopted by the Pope. Their daily life was taken care of by the Cardinal Bessarion, who was born in Trebizond and had been educated in Constantinople. Zoe thus had a new name, Sophia. Life in Italy was not good. Andreas claimed to be the legitimate heir of the empire, but had no heroic posture and fell in love with a Roman citizen of low status. After Bessarion's death, he and his brother Manuel fell into financial difficulties. In response, Andreas chose to sell his titles. Manuel's behavior was even more extreme. He chose to leave Rome and return to Constantinople, or Constantinople, and found a job under the Sultan Mehmed II. Compared to her hard -to judge brothers, Sophia's situation was much better. After all, any European ruler with a little common sense would have a third of respect for the title of the last princess of the Roman Empire. What's more, she was a single last princess. In those years, in the 10-8- villages, she was a famous beautiful girl. In the years Sophia studied in Rome, the matchmakers who came to propose almost flattened the threshold of the Pope's door. Sophia's adoptive father, Paul I, then began the papal selection. In the end, among the endless stream of visitors, he found a real distinguished guest, the Grand Prince of Moscow, Ivan I Vasilievich, the supreme ruler of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, had been on the throne since 1462 and was about 30 years old. His first wife, Maria, died in 1467. The King Paul I seized this situation and began to vigorously promote the marriage between the Grand Prince and Sophia. In November 1416, Cardinal Bessarion led a papal delegation to visit Moscow. The two sides had a frank exchange and fully exchanged views. The Moscow side responded positively to the Pope's proposal. Then the Moscow side sent an envoy to visit Rome and brought back a portrait of the princess. The two sides hit it off. In 1472, Sophia first held a formal wedding in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, in the absence of Ivan III. Then, accompanied by Bessarion, she arrived in Moscow after a 4-month journey on December 8, 1472. The official wedding of the two was held in the Annunciation Cathedral in Moscow. However, it did not follow the Pope's wish to hold a Catholic ceremony, but followed the tradition of the Orthodox Church. I got you. Insects. The baboons are here. The rebirth of your own when the gods are. Christina is the dog. Do this is what you've been waiting for. In China. Rosa de Borghese slaver you interesting in China. Boss my divorce Nash slaver you be chasing you in China. Sophia's life in Moscow was relatively free. She was frequently active in diplomatic occasions. She introduced the Grand Eastern Roman ceremonies and meticulous court etiquette into the Kremlin and supported her husband in calling himself the Third Rome. In terms of diplomacy, Sophia actively promoted her husband to stop paying tribute to the Mongol Golden Horde. Moscow, after the standoff on the Ugra River, in fact broke away from the suzerain-vassal relationship with the Mongols. However, Sophia's most important job in Moscow was to seize the highest position in the harem and fight for the right of succession for her own children. Ivan I had a son with his first wife Maria. The young Ivan, born in 1458, he was Ivan I's eldest son and legitimate heir. But Sophia's arrival obviously made the future of Moscow full of variables. Two factions quickly formed in the court, supporting the young Ivan and Sophia, respectively. Sophia's relationship with her husband Ivan should have been very good. In more than 10 years, she gave birth to 9 children for the Grand Prince. From this, it can be seen that the communication between the husband and wife should have been very frequent. Under the influence of the person by his pillow, Ivan I's attitude towards his eldest son gradually cooled down. But the young Ivan did not sit idly by. His excellent performance still kept his hopes alive. In 1477, the young Ivan became the co-ruler of the duchy. In 1480, the young Ivan led the military operation on the Ugra River, showing his extraordinary courage. Ivan I was very satisfied with his eldest son's outstanding performance. In 1483, the young Ivan married Elena, the daughter of the Prince of Moldavia, Stephen II, and in the same year gave birth to his eldest son Dmitry. In 1485, Ivan I conquered Tivran and gave this land, the hometown of the young Ivan's mother, to him to manage. During this period, Sophia's situation became extremely difficult. Her brother Andreas, who had come from afar to seek refuge with her, was forced to return to Western Europe. If nothing unexpected happened, he would become the next Grand Prince of Moscow. But if nothing unexpected happened, he was going to have an accident. In 1490, the young Ivan was diagnosed with gout. After careful treatment by a well-trained doctor, he unexpectedly returned to the Lord. There have always been various claims that the sudden death of the young Ivan was Sophia's conspiracy, but there is not enough evidence to support this claim. In any case, Sophia and her children were the beneficiaries of this event. Now, all that stood in the way of victory was the imperial grandson, Dmitry. Sophia and Dmitry's mother, Elena, then began a silent battle. During this period, Sophia and her eldest son were even expelled from the capital. But after a long period of court struggle and conspiracy, in 1502, the Grand Prince Ivan I personally sent his good grandson Dmitry and his mother to prison and declared Sophia's eldest son, Vasily, as the heir to the Grand Duchy. 5 years later, Dmitri died in prison. Sophia won the final victory of a long protracted war. At this time, it had been a full 30 years since she married Ivan III. Perhaps the long political struggle had exhausted her hardened blood, or perhaps because she had finally fulfilled her long cherished wish for many years. On April 7, 1503, Sophia died in Moscow. 2 years later, Ivan I also passed away. Their son, the 26-year-old Vasily III, became the new Grand Prince of Moscow. During his reign, he actively expanded his territory, annexing Pskov in 1510, recovering Smolensk in 1514, and annexing Ryazan in 1521. He himself may not be famous, but his son's name is thunderous Ivan IV, that is, Ivan the Terrible. Every ruler of the later Rurik dynasty of Russia was a descendant of Sophia. Moscow and Constantinople are separated by thousands of kilometers. Michael V. I and Ivan the Terrible are also separated by hundreds of years. But because of Sophia's existence, they had a wonderful blood connection. I believe that the later Russian rulers, when they raised the banner of the Third Rome out of political ambition, would also sigh at this wonderful historical charm. This is the story of a last prince. A civilized ancient country of more than 2,000 years was destroyed in one day. As the last heir of the Roman Empire, could this last prince create a miracle? On May 29, 1453, amidst the roar of cannons and the horn of the Sultan's cavalry charge, the fall of Constantinople marked the arrival of the final moment of this old empire that had lasted for more than 2,000 years. However, at this time, the despotate of the Morea on the Peloponnese Peninsula and Trebizond in the Pontic Mountains were still lingering on, and the eldest son of the despot of Morea, Thomas Andreas, was born not long ago. Although he had the highly symbolic identity of the last prince, although he would be the brother of the Grand Duchess of Moscow, Zoe Sophia, according to common sense, a noble son with such a symbolic identity should have a rich and noble life, becoming a distinguished guest of the rulers of various countries. However, in fact, this last imperial son of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire was famous for his financial difficulties, unable to escape the fate of wandering and being destitute in the West. So why was this nephew of Constantine XI, the brother of the Russian Terina Sophia, so embarrassed? Andreas was born on January 17, 1453, in the Morea. Just over 4 months later, the 1,000-year-old capital of the Romans, Constantinople, fell to the Ottomans. His imperial uncle, the last emperor, Constantine XI, died with his country, his father, Thomas, and another uncle, Demetrios, as co-rulers, continued to linger on in the Morea. Unlike Thomas, who still tried to use the Morea as a base for Roman revival, Demetrios completely sided with the Ottoman Empire. The quarrel between the two brothers led to another civil war, which made their nominal suzerain, the Ottoman Mehmed II, lose his patience. He sent troops to annex the Morea into the Ottoman territory. Demetrios was captured and surrendered to the Ottoman Empire. Thomas, on the other hand, fled with his family to the island of Corfu, and then went to Rome alone to seek the support of the Pope. The content about Andreas's siblings has been explained in the video about Sophia before, so I won't go into much detail here. In short, in 1465, Andreas was brought to the city of Rome. His father Thomas died shortly after. With the consent of Pope Paul II, he was recognized as his father's heir and held the title of Despot of Morea. The 3 homeless children were placed in the city of Rome and taken care of by the Roman immigrant Cardinal Bessarion. Although he had the title of by the grace of God, Roman monarch, Andreas had never even been to the capital Constantinople and had no understanding of the meaning of the Roman Empire. He received a Catholic education in Rome. Apart from his imperial bloodline, his spiritual world had no intersection with the traditional Eastern Roman culture. However, compared to ordinary nobles, Andreas's early life in Rome was very comfortable. The Pope would regularly pay a sum of money to supply his daily life, and under the careful care of Bessarion, the several poor orphans could also feel the warmth of family affection. But the world is impermanent, and changes are always full of life. The year 1472 was a very important note. In this year, Andreas's sisters Zoe married Ivan II of Moscow and was separated from her brothers forever. It was also in this year that the cardinal, who had taken great care of the children, Bessarion, died. The 19-year-old Andreas suddenly became an orphan. From now on, he had to bear all the storms of life himself, and his financial difficulties came almost immediately with the changes of 1472. The Holy See had paid his father Thomas 300 gold coins a month, and the cardinal had paid an additional 200 gold coins a month. After Thomas's death, the total amount paid to Andreas and his brother Manuel was basically the same. Under Bessarion's care, this fund could be paid in full and on time. But after Bessarion's death, the payment of the balance quickly deteriorated. In the first 3 months of 1473, the two, who should have received 900 gold coins, only actually received 690. This money seemed like a lot, but in fact, it was too little for the two princes. His brother Manuel soon could not bear the poverty and chose to leave to seek opportunities. In 1474, Manuel left Rome for Milan and joined the Milanese army to maintain his life. The following year, he sent his resume to Charles the Bold of Burgundy, but the two sides failed to reach an agreement. Manuel had to return to Rome alone, but the situation in Rome was even worse. Since he left Rome to look for a job, the Pope had taken the opportunity to stop his living funds. His brother was only left with 150 gold coins a month. Manuel could not live in Rome at all. To make a living, he had to make a decision that went against the will of his ancestors: return to the land of his homeland, go to Constantinople, and have an audience with the Ottoman Padishah Mehmed I. The Padishah warmly received him and gave him a stable iron rice bowl to spend the rest of his life. It can be said that after all the hardships, the brothers are still there, and they smile and forget their enmity when they meet. I am Xiao Xiao. We don't know if their enmity was really forgotten, but Manuel successfully landed a job in the Ottoman Empire. But his brother Andreas, with the identity of the last imperial son of Rome, could not go to seek refuge with the enemy, right? He could only continue to struggle for his livelihood in Rome. Why did Andreas end up so poor and destitute in the city of Rome? Later generations often looked at Andreas with a negative eye. The Scottish historian George Finlay believed that Andreas's tragic fate was not worthy of historical attention. Many people believed that Andreas was an immoral and extravagant playboy who squandered the generous papal pension on a loose life and eventually died in poverty. Believing that Andreas's predicament was entirely his own fault, some people also believed that the reason he was treated harshly by the Holy See was because he fell in love with a woman of low status in Rome, which caused the dissatisfaction of the Pope and the clergy. Andreas's wife, Caterina, was indeed a Roman, but some rumors described her as a woman engaged in a special profession. There is no actual evidence for this speculation. Even if this statement is true, it is not the main reason for the Holy See to cut Andreas's living expenses. In fact, the reduction of Andreas's living expenses was mainly due to war. In 1476, Duke Galeazzo Maria Sforza of Milan was assassinated. The Pope was thus involved in the Italian wars. Andreas's living funds were greatly reduced. In June 1478, he received 150 ducats. But due to the war, he only received 100 ducats in the following months. In 1488 and 1489, Andreas could only receive 100 ducats a month, and the actual amount received was often lower than this number. In August 1492, after Pope Alexander I ascended the throne, the living funds were even further reduced to 50 ducats a month. Andreas was not alone. He could not achieve one person eats. The whole family is not hungry. He still had a family and many followers from his homeland to support. For a living, in 1480, Andreas left Rome for Moscow to seek refuge with his sister Sophia, who had become the wife of Ivan III. It is said that Sophia later complained that she had no more jewelry because she had given them all to her brother Andreas. But Sophia's position at this time was not stable. As we described in the Sophia chapter before, Sophia's palace struggle was gradually entering a white-hot stage. As a maternal relative, Andreas was inevitably affected. Just 1 year later, in 1481, because Ivan II's eldest son, the young Ivan, performed brilliantly, his attitude towards Sophia gradually cooled down. Andreas also had to leave Russia. Andreas, who returned to Rome, was in a more difficult economic situation. He was forced to wander among the various countries of Western Europe, like his grandfather, asking for help everywhere, or rather, begging. In France, he was generously received by King Charles III. In England, King Henry I was not so enthusiastic and only symbolically gave some financial assistance. For most of his adult life, Andreas lived in a house in Campo Marzio that 6th IV had granted him when Zoe got married. This house was probably located next to the local church of Sant Enria. In his later years, Andreas was even more poor and destitute. He and his entourage were often covered in ragged clothes instead of the silkened purple robes that were the standard for nobles. To make a living, the old and frail Andreas did not hesitate to sell his titles in exchange for subsidies. The image of a prodigal son that everyone has heard of comes from here. So, did Andreas sell his precious Roman imperial titles really just to support his family, purely for money? We'll talk about it next time. As the last officially recognized legitimate claimant to the Roman throne, Andreas's image has always been that of a good nothing prodigal son. Many people believe that he, as the heir of 1,000-year-old ancient country, not only did not shoulder the heavy responsibility of reviving his homeland, but instead indulged in debauchery, selling the precious imperial titles at a low price to the barbarians of Western Europe. He was truly a disgrace to the Roman imperial family. However, is this really the case? Let's put aside Andreas's personal living habits for a moment. In fact, Andreas never gave up his efforts to restore his homeland throughout his life. And his sale of titles was not just for money. Right and wrong? Let's talk about it slowly after the opening credits. Initially in Rome, Andreas's seal was imprinted with the double headed eagle of the power, Iologos family, and the motto, meaning by the grace of God, Roman monarch. This title was not high enough compared to the identity of the last imperial son of Rome. To make the title match his identity, Andreas tried to shape himself into the called Emperor of Constantinople. This title had never been used by his father or the previous Roman emperors. However, considering that Andreas was less than a year old when the Roman Empire fell and had never seen the appearance of Constantinople, this error is understandable. Although this title was different from the traditional title used by the Eastern Roman emperors, It was the traditional title used by Western Europe, especially the Pope, for the Byzantine emperors. Andreas was also widely recognized as the legitimate heir of the Byzantine Empire. The most famous supporter of this was Cardinal Bessarion. His father Thomas's old subordinate, Georges Rancès, also acknowledged that he was the legitimate heir of the Palaiologos dynasty. Andreas, who was widely recognized, also regarded himself as the successor of the empire, with the mission of restoring the old capital and revitalizing Rome. So he also actively devoted himself to the Eastern Roman Restoration movement. In the late summer of 1481, Andreas returned to the city of Rome from Russia, and this moment seemed to be a good time for a resurrection. In these 2 years, a long war broke out between the Ottomans and Venice. The Peloponnese Peninsula was in flames. Venice and the Ottomans frequently fought for control of the peninsula's territory. In August 1480, the Ottoman army suffered heavy losses in the siege of Rhodes. The Ottoman Sultan, the famous conqueror Mehmed I, also died on May 3, 1481. His sons, Semend Bey Ezid, were at odds with each other. The Ottoman civil war seemed to be on the verge of breaking out. Andreas then, with his entourage, immediately went to southern Italy and settled in the port of Brindisi, planning to launch an expedition against the Ottoman Empire. During the preparations, Andreas hired several mercenaries, including the Greek soldier Krokodailos Skailautes, who had led an uprising in the Morea in 1480, as a guided military commander during the expedition. On September 15, 1481, Pope Sixtus IV wrote to the bishops of Italy, asking them to do their best to help Andreas cross the Adriatic Sea. Andreas also received financial assistance from King Ferdinand I of Naples. Everything seemed to be ready. If nothing unexpected happened, we would see the successor of the Palaiologos dynasty return to the Morea region like lightning, and then recover Constantinople and restore the great Roman Empire. However, anyone with a discerning eye can see that Andreas's wish to restore his homeland was just a pipe dream. Although he had made plans and preparations, Andreas still failed to return to Greece, but instead wasted his time in the court at the invitation of the monarch of Naples. During this period, the new Ottoman Sultan Bey Ezid stabilized his position. The great powers of Western Europe were divided and disunited, and had no power to unite to launch a war against the Ottoman Empire. Think about it, 20 years ago, when Constantinople had not yet fallen, the Western Europeans did not send much reinforcements. You can't expect them to invest much effort in this blank stock of Andreas. The most critical factor for Andreas's failure to launch the expedition was still poverty. Although Pope Sixtus IV was said to have given Andreas 3,000 ducats in 1481, there is no evidence that this was specifically funded for his restoration of the Morea. The British historian Jonathan Harris believes that this money was more likely just an advance payment he formed in southern Italy. It did not include any additional expenses beyond the normal expenses of Andreas and his family. Not only was the Pope unwilling to contribute, but the big moneybags Venice was also unwilling to work for Andreas for free, help you take the Morea, and then let you be the despot of Morea. Then didn't I fight for nothing? To take a step back, in fact, Venice was no match for the Ottomans at all, let alone recovering the Morea. The failure of the expedition not only shattered Andreas's wish, but also almost exhausted their already not minus abundant economic reserves. After that, Andreas was even more poor and destitute. So we return to the topic we talked about at the beginning. This last imperial son of the Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire finally had to start selling his titles. In 1490, Andreas left Rome and went to Moscow again. However, he was no longer as welcome as last time. After all, it is generally rare for people to welcome poor relatives who only come to borrow money. My uncle Andreas. So Andreas had no choice but to go to France. There, he was generously received by King Charles VII. Faced with this ambitious French king, Andreas spent a lot of time discussing with him the possibility of a crusade against the Ottoman Empire. In 1492, Andreas went to England again. King Henry VI was not as enthusiastic and hospitable as Charles VII. He symbolically gave Andreas a sum of financial assistance and then sent him out of the country. I don't know if you have noticed, but Andreas's tracks seem to be like those of an old acquaintance, that is, his great-grandfather Manuel II. Or, from an overall perspective, the guiding ideology of the Palais Iologos royal family was to seek help from Western Europe and the Pope. The British historian Harris believes that Andreas's subsequent action of appearing with titles was just a continuation of the ancestral law of the Palais Iologos. Charles VII and Andreas then negotiated. The French king's envoy, Perron de Bachy, assured Andreas that in return for the titles of Emperor of Constantinople, Trebizond, and Despot of Serbia, Andreas would receive 4,300 ducats a year, of which 2,000 ducats was an immediate down payment. In addition, Charles would provide him with a private garden, give him a fief with an annual income of at least 5,000 ducats. Seeing this, many viewers will probably scold Andreas. The titles left to you by your ancestors, you don't cherish them at all. You sell your ancestral fields without feeling any pain. But don't be anxious. Let's finish reading the following terms. Andreas retained the title of Despot of Morea. He requested that Charles send a crusade to recover the territory of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine emperor would belong to Charles, but the Morea would belong to himself. In this way, if the French king could really recover the old land of Byzantium, then Andreas could be considered to have restored his country to some extent. However, with the death of Charles VII in 1498, this transaction also vanished into thin air. After that, although several French kings continued to advertise themselves as the successors of the Byzantine title, because Charles VII failed to recover the Morea as promised, the church believed that the title should be returned to Andreas. So the title of Emperor of the Byzantine Empire nominally returned to the hands of the original owner. Andreas took back his title, although it had no meaning for him anymore. Andreas, who had entered his later years, rushed around all day to support his family. The wish to restore his homeland was also impossible to realize, and his deeds of selling titles also became a topic of conversation, and even a laughingstock for the people of Western Europe. Andreas was about to face the end of his life. Who would his titles eventually fall to? Would anyone still inherit his wish to restore Rome? We'll talk about it next time. In 1498, King Charles VII of France died. This also marked the complete shattering of the hope of the last Roman imperial son to restore his homeland. In that year, he was already 40-5 years old. And it was also exactly 40-5 years since the fall of the Roman Empire. In these 40-5 years, Andreas was often the focus of people's attention. The melon-eating masses of Western Europe watched his every move with great interest. A series of his actions were also discussed and criticized by the citizens. Entering his later years, Andreas, who had been rushing around for a living for many years, was weakened on the verge of death. After wandering for half his life, he ultimately did not meet a wise ruler. Wandering for half my life, I only regret not meeting a wise Lord. If you don't abandon me, I am willing to worship you as my adoptive father. Faced with a confused and dark future, how would he deal with his titles? And what tragic end would he face? After the opening credits, we'll see you there. Andreas had to sell his precious titles again and again, but no one was willing to sincerely help him realize his plan to return to the Morea. But despite this, Andreas's influence in the city of Rome was still strong. Although many people despised him for his unscrupulous and desperate behavior for money, as the saying goes, black and red is also red, the Pope still invited Andreas to participate in many large scale events. His relationship with Pope Alexander I was quite good. In the inner circle of the Papal States, he still occupied an important position, and even once became a member of the Papal Honor Guard, escorting distinguished guests who visit the city. On March 11, 1501, the Lithuanian ambassador entered the city of Rome, and Andreas also almost occupied the sea position. This stubborn old man always insisted on his status. In his later years, he also met many other claimants of former Byzantine territories, such as Carlo II Taco, Constantinople I, and others. Andreas still stubbornly believed that only he was the legitimate heir of Rome, and all others were fakes. In June of 1502, Andreas died in poverty in Rome. In his will, he once again gave up his claim to the imperial throne, perhaps because he was inspired by the great victory of the Reconquista, or perhaps he hoped that more Romans could learn the courage of the Iberian reconquest. Andreas, before his death, granted the imperial title to Ferdinand I of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, designating them and their successors as the successors of the Roman Empire. At this time, the Aragonese royal family also had claims to the titles of Duke of Athens and Duke of Neopatris, and other Greek duchies. Andreas seemed to be trying to attract the Spanish monarchs, attracting them to use southern Italy and Sicily as a base to continue to launch crusades, conquer the Peloponnese Peninsula, and then further restore Constantinople. But things did not go as planned. Neither Ferdinand nor Isabella, nor any of the succeeding monarchs of the Kingdom of Spain ever used this title. Even if Spain later really fought against the Ottomans, it was already under the rule of the Habsburg royal family and had nothing to do with the concept of restoring Rome. Did Andreas have any children? This is a very interesting and controversial topic. According to Donald Nicol in The Immortal Emperor, Constantine Iologos, who served as a commander in the Papal Guard, may have been Andreas's son. According to records, Constantine died in 1508, 6 years later than Andreas. In Russia, there is a record that Andreas had a daughter named Maria. She was married by her aunt, Princess Sophia, to a Russian nobleman. However, this record is not confirmed by Western historical materials and is basically not credible. In addition, there are possible names such as Don Fernando, Constantine Arianiti and Theodore Iologos. In the late 16th century, a theologian from the island of Chios named Jacob Palaiologos claimed to be the grandson of Andreas Iologos. He created a son for Andreas named Theodore. However, Jacob unfortunately became a Christian heretic and was eventually burned as a heretic in 1585. There were also many others who claimed to be descendants of Andreas, but most of them were just forcibly associating themselves for the sake of fame, and there was no evidence to prove their identity. The above Andreas most likely had no descendants and no suitable heir to take over the heavy title. In this way, his act of giving the claim to the throne to the Iberian couple before his death is even better understood. Andreas was not yet 50 when he died. After his death, his widow Katerina was given 100 ducats by Pope Alexander I to pay for Andreas's funeral expenses. He was honorably buried in St. Peter's Basilica, resting beside his father Thomas. After understanding Andreas's life, how should we evaluate this last imperial son of the Roman Empire? In the traditional view, Andreas is oft unattacked and despised. For example, in 1481, Gherardi de Volterra wrote that Andreas's financial situation was due to his excessive indulgence in love, making and pleasure. His marriage to the Roman lady Caterina in 1479 also became an object of attack. Caterina's identity is usually described as a lady from the streets of Rome. Everyone understands the connotation behind this title. Andreas's character was also despised for this reason. Many people believed that he was obsessed with pleasure, debauchery, and lived an extremely luxurious life. But isn't this also the normal state of life for the powerful and noble of that era? Moreover, as we have said before, the living expenses Andreas received from the Holy See were reduced again and again. He probably did not have the conditions to engage in overly luxurious pleasure activities. Even if all the above accusations against Andreas are true, there is one fact that cannot be ignored, and that is that Andreas never gave up his ideal of restoring Rome. Andreas's birth seemed noble, but was actually tragic. He lost his parents before the age of 20. He wandered from a young age and did not receive a traditional Eastern Orthodox education. Such a down-and-out nobleman, born at the time of the fall of his country, who had never seen the appearance of the great capital Constantinople with his own eyes, fought for his great homeland, which he had no impression of for his entire life. Even at the last moment of his life, he did not forget to inspire later generations. The last days of the Eastern Roman Empire were destined to come to an end. His grandfather Manuel I could not reverse the great trend of history. His uncle John I could not do it. His uncle Constantine I could not do it. His father Thomas could not do it. And he himself could not do it even more. In a desperate situation, Andreas chose to follow the ancestral law, seeking help from Western Europe and the Pope, hoping that they could really extend a helping hand. But reality was cruel. Even if countless verbal promises were made, no country would be willing or able to help Andreas restore his country. The expedition against the Ottoman Empire in 1481, although it did not materialize, Andreas had made full preparations. His attitude was at least worthy of affirmation. As for the biggest stain on his life, the sale of the imperial title, first of all, he never claimed the title of emperor and autocrat of the Romans, which was the title of the Roman emperors. And even if he had claimed it, it would have been illegal according to Roman law. Secondly, if he did not give the title to others, did he have any other choice? He himself had no children. His brother Manuel had already sought refuge with the Ottoman Sultan. His sister was still in Moscow, but she was an Orthodox princess, and the Roman Curia would not allow him to do so. To take a step back, giving the title to the Grand Prince of Russia was no different in essence from giving it to the Iberian couple. Andreas's life was undoubtedly a failure. He fought for everything he longed for all his life, but in the end, he got almost nothing. Whether it was the traditional view of money and women, or the larger picture of a rich country, none of these were realized. Andreas left the world with his regrets. But who has not had regrets? At least this last imperial son of the Roman Empire finally died of illness in the city of Rome, the place of origin of the Roman Empire. He still rests in the city of Rome, the city founded by Romulus. Such imperfection and coincidence may be the charm of history. I, the heir to the Roman throne, send money. As long as you give me 50, I can form a crusade to fight back to Constantinople. After the matter is done, I will make you the mayor of Constantinople. What? You say I'm a liar? How can I be a liar? My ancestors were the famous Palaeologos emperors, the Komnenos royal family, the Lasker is royal family, the Angelos. Let's forget about the Angelos. The above fraudulent information seems comical, but it was actually rampant in the Western European world after the fall of Rome. The lords of various countries in Western Europe would from time to time receive fraudulent information like Rome sent money. We can't help but ask, after the fall of the Roman Empire, did there still exist a legitimate heir of Rome? Did the claims of these fake Roman claimants have any legitimacy? After the opening credits, let's discuss this issue together. Let's not talk about the most legitimate Roman claimant, Andreas Palaiologos and Sophia Palaiologine, who have their own separate videos. The first to appear are the rulers of various countries who obtained the Roman claim. The first is King Charles V of France. In 1494, he reached a series of superficial transactions with Andreas and took the claim to the Roman throne into his pocket. However, with his death in 1498, because he failed to recover the land of Byzantium, this claim to the throne was declared to be taken back by the Holy See. However, the successors of Charles V still chose to continue to advertise their legitimate Roman identity. Louis XII, Francis I, Henry II, and Francis I also continued to use the imperial title and honor. Among them, Louis XII once entered Italy and launched an eastern expedition on the grounds of recovering Constantinople and Jerusalem. Francis I publicly claimed to be the Emperor of Constantinople. It was not until after Charles IX that this claim was abandoned by the French king. Charles IX wrote, "The title of the Byzantine Empire is not more prominent, better, or sweeter than the title of king." Of course, France and the Ottomans later formed a poisonous holy alliance, so they could no longer claim their Byzantine throne. Besides the French king, the Iberian couple, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, were both granted the claim to the Roman emperor before Andreas's death. However, this time Andreas was giving a warm face to a cold face. Neither Ferdinand nor Isabella, nor any of the succeeding monarchs of the Kingdom of Spain, ever used this title. The later Spanish Habsburg royal family already claimed to be the emperors of the Romans, that is, the royal family of the Holy Roman Empire, so they would not care about a small title like the Emperor of Constantinople. It seems that the right to claim the Roman emperor was not so popular among the upper class of Western Europe, but among the common people it was very popular, and the style was also much cuter. After the fall of Constantinople, many descendants of the Palaiologos family suddenly appeared among the common people in Europe. For example, in 1527, when Cardinal Wolsey was passing through Moravia, he wrote a letter to the Holy See to report, "I met a traveler from Bohemia. He taught me his views on poetry." But most importantly, he claimed to be the Emperor of Constantinople. He said he was the Son of Heaven, sent to drive out the Turks and restore Greece. This brother was penniless and could only live on the reward of the King of Hungary. He would not tell me where he came from, nor who his family was, but he seemed very sincere in his belief that he was the Roman emperor. He only slept 2 hours every night and spent all the rest of his time praying, always ready to complete his mission one day. Such an encounter was already commonplace for Europeans in the 16th century. If any lord's jurisdiction did not have to people who claimed to be the Roman emperor, they would be embarrassed to greet other lords. The Pope was also a victim of this kind of fraudulent behavior. In 1505, a Greek who called himself Michael Palaiologos came to Rome and cried to the Pope about his experience. He said that to defend his land from the invasion of the Turks, he had fought for 3 months. But in the end, he was outnumbered. His wife and children, and all his family members, became prisoners of the Ottoman Sultan. He now had to raise a ransom of 12,000 gold coins to rescue them. 12,000 gold coins. Thinking back to Andreas's pension in his later years, it was only 600 gold coins a year, and his brother was really by the Ottoman Sultan's side. If he could raise his arms and call, on the kings of Western Europe to raise a ransom for his brother. Where would he need to worry about not having enough money? As a result, faced with such an outrageous request, Pope Julius I actually received him warmly and even wrote a letter calling on the kings of various countries to donate. Really, this Pope, you can't just because your name is Julius, think you have a relationship with Caesar. Caesar was captured by pirates back then, and you want to pay tribute to him by being scammed? Andreas really cried himself to faint in the toilet. The Pope called this Michael the cousin of the most outstanding ruler of Constantinople, the ruler of the town of Faria. However, the town of Faria was far away on the north bank of the Black Sea in the Crimea, and this town had already been captured by the Ottomans in 1475. You, Michael, lost your old home, your wife and children were captured, and you waited 30 years to ask the Pope for help. Can your wife wait for you for 30 years? Although there are many claims that this Michael really had a relationship with the Palaiologos royal family. So what? The direct descendant of the Palaiologos, Andreas, was so miserable. What waves could you, a distant relative who knows how far away, stir up? In fact, the later fate of this Mr. Michael was also extremely absurd. When he was traveling in England and the DD countries, he overturned. In Flanders, he was reported by the locals as a fake beggar and a Lombard sodomite. Then he was thrown into prison and disappeared from the historical records. I don't have much feeling about the first point, a fake beggar. I am very interested in the second accusation against him. Mr. Michael, did your wife know that you did this? Similar to Michael was Isabella Las Carina. From this surname, everyone can understand which family she wanted to associate with. After messing with the Palaiologos, the Lascaris family could not be let go. She claimed that she had lost everything at the hands of the Turks and needed to raise money to redeem her for children. She needed 1,300 ducats. This one was much more pragmatic. It was still Pope Julius II. He called this Miss Isabella a noble and true Christian, a descendant of the noble bloodline of Constantinople, the legal owner of the castle of an ANI. Her husband sacrificed himself to defend the castle. Did he really sacrifice himself? It is recommended to meet with Michael and Isabella to discuss. Hey, are you both considered widowed? Then, why not? The era when Isabella claimed the throne was already the 16th century, and the Lascaris family had lost the Eastern Roman throne as early as 1259. This means Isabella really dared to fight for half of the Northwest, only to know that there was a loyal subject overseas. Her rhetoric was similar to Mr. Michael's. Their endings were also very similar. Isabella was also imprisoned in Lincolnshire, England, and then there was no news of her. In short, the people of Western Europe were really fed up with this group of imperial relatives. From time to time, they would say that their father, mother, wife, husband, or children were captured by the Ottomans and needed money to redeem them. These claims are really familiar. Or rather, the fraudulent routines from ancient times to the present are all connected. The anti-fraud awareness of the people of Western Europe was also stimulated. The two people above are only a very small part of those who claimed to be the successors of the Roman emperor. Everyone please note, the Palaiologos are there. The Lascaris are also there. So how can the Komnenes be missing from the claim to the Roman throne? In the next video, we will continue to talk about those royal descendants who claimed the Roman throne. In the 15th and 16th centuries, after the fall of Constantinople, Greek refugees from the Balkans and Asia Minor always liked to package themselves as relatives of the original Eastern Roman imperial family. Some pretended to be Palaiologos, some claimed to be Lascaris, and of course, there were no shortage of people who claimed to be descendants of the Komnenes. The Komnenes dynasty ruled the Eastern Roman Empire for a long time, from 1081. After the end of the Komnenes dynasty in 1185, the Empire of Trebizond became the territory of the Komnenes family. For more than 200 years until 1461, this family lived a happy life of loving each other and occasionally fighting civil wars on this narrow land. After the complete fall of Rome, an Albanian named Constantine Komnenes claimed his legitimate throne in Western Europe. What was going on? Constantine Komnenes Arianites, an Albanian living in Italy. Many viewers will ask, what does an Albanian have to do with the Roman throne? Hey, there really is a connection. He claimed that his ancestors had both Albanian royal and Byzantine imperial bloodlines. His father, George, was a small lord in the Ragusa region. His family had a blood connection with the Komnenes dynasty, established by Alexios. In the 1432s, an uprising against the Ottoman Empire broke out in Albania. The famous leader Skanderbeg led the Albanians to successfully achieve independence and repeatedly defeated the Ottoman invasions. George was one of Skanderbeg's most important military generals. However, George had the soul of a Xiaofengxian. In 1456, with the support of the Venetians, he rebelled against Skanderbeg, trying to seize the leadership of the Albanian region. However, under Skanderbeg's thunderous means, he was quickly defeated. The magnanimous Skanderbeg did not punish him. George and his family were able to continue to live in Albania. In 1468, Skanderbeg and George died one after another. The Ottomans made a comeback, invading Albania on a large scale in 1474 and 1479, and then completely controlled the situation in Albania in the early 16th century. Constantine, as a local military noble, was sent to Italy in 1000. For 169th, he was appointed as a papal vicar by the Pope and also married into the family of the Lord of Montferrat. In the 1492s, he became the regent of his nephew, the Marquis of Montferrat, William IX. In 1504, he served as the ambassador of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian to the city of Rome, left a deep impression on Pope Julius II. It was this Julius II again. I have to say, your vision is quite good. Whoever you see is the heir to the Roman throne. This Constantine was not an easy person to deal with, but an old lamp that consumed a lot of oil. As early as the 1492s, he had claimed to be the leader of the Balkan Christians, and then gradually became more and more aggressive, claiming to be the legal ruler of Thessaly and Macedonia. Later, he added the title of Duke of Achaia to himself. Although he did not accept the title of Emperor of Constantinople, he still could not resist and, after Andreas's death, soon claimed the title of Despot of Morea. This Constantine claimed to have the blood of the Komnenes and also married into the Iologos family of Montferrat. His niece was also the wife of the despot of Serbia. It can be said that he had all the buffs. What is outrageous is that he also claimed that his claim to the Macedonian region came from Alexander the Great. Is he possessed by Julian? This is no less than saying today that you are a descendant of Qin Shi Huang. This Constantine not only could talk, but also could do. When King Charles VII of France went to Italy to plan an expedition against the Ottomans, this Mr. Constantine also got involved, going to the Albanian coast to incite a local uprising. But in the end, it was like an egg hitting a stone. He fled back to Italy in disgrace. Constantine did not give up. He later also participated in the meeting to establish the League of Cambrai. In 1514, Constantine was appointed governor of Fano by the Pope. He had also made efforts to restart the Crusades. But although Constantine had a serious attitude, The other melon, minus eating masses of the West, did not think so. If noble blood alone can bring honor to those who do not deserve it, then the situation of the king of Cyprus would not be so bad. I suppose His Excellency Constantine does not want to be the governor of Fano. He will surely be able to recover Macedonia, right? Who can be more noble than His Excellency Constantine? He was once the despot of Morea and the prince of Macedonia. How can he become the governor of Fano today? Constantine ultimately failed to return to Macedonia. What he brought to the Italian people was mainly talk and laughter. Tommaso de Uriavat et Say was also one of the claimants to the Roman throne. The royal families he was involved with were the Lascars and the Vatatzes. His father, George, was also called George. It seems that the fathers of the Roman claimants also have something in common. This old George, at the last moment of the Eastern Roman Empire, was the governor of the island of Lemnos. He later fled to Corfu. Tommaso claimed to be a nobleman of Constantinople. Proclus, who was born in Italy, claimed to be a descendant of the Iologos. His grandson Theodore inherited his grandfather's will. When he died, his friend listed his Iologos bloodline for him. We can see such a bronze inscription. Here lies Theodore Iologos of Pesaro, Italy, a descendant of the last Christian emperor of Greece, the son of Camilla, the grandson of Prosper, the great-grandson of Theodore, the great-grandson of John. John was the son of Thomas, the second brother of Constantine Iologos. Constantine was the last ruler of Constantinople until it was occupied by the Turks. I don't know if Thomas knew that he had a son named John. Did Andreas and Sophia know that they had a brother named John? There are some claims that John was Thomas's illegitimate son. Thomas, did your wife Catherine know? Theodore's son, Ferdinand, moved to Barbados shortly before the outbreak of the English Civil War and married Rebecca Pomfret. He died in 1679 and was buried in St. John's Church. The church has Doric stone columns. His tombstone has an inscription, "Here lies Ferdinand Iologos, a descendant of the last Christian emperor of Greece." Churchwarden of this parish from 1655 to 1656, vestryman for 20 years, died on October 3, 1679. His son, Theodore, married Martha Bradbury of Barbados and returned to England with him. They settled in Stepney and then he died in Cornwall in 1693. He had a posthumous daughter. Her name was rather strange, God's Call. We do not know the story of this girl. If no new evidence can be found, we can only assume that this fatherless Stepney girl was the last known imperial descendant of the Eastern Roman Empire, and even of Roman civilization. Let's assume for a moment that John Iologos really existed. So far, starting from Sophia and Andreas, we have gradually sorted out the various gentlemen and ladies who claim to have the Roman imperial claim after the fall of the Roman Empire. And the actual claimants' worth are more than those we mentioned in the video. Even to this day, there are still people with the surnames Iologos and Komnenes. Of course, their legitimacy is not as high as the potato chip content in a bag of Lay's potato chips. We'll see you in the next video.